They got the beat, the campus beat, the campus beat. Yeah, the campus beat.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. A special edition of Campus Beat. We've got a guest on a situation we've discussed previously here. The Professor Samuel Abrams, who is a poli-sci professor at Sarah Lawerence, the alma mater of One Tiny Dancer. He had the audacity to note research that he did that finds the distribution of administrators across the ideological spectrum is 12 to 1 left to right. This is about college administrators, so as much time is focused on particular professors or professorate generally, he focused on college administrators more uniformly left than college faculties. And that unleashed the Marxist mobs on campus, both students as well as academics, as well as administrators, few of which who stood with Professor Abrams and his research. Now, again, some context here in terms of Sarah Lawerence, what you're dealing with. The Marxist mob has also issued demands connected to a sit-in. The Diaspora Coalition on campus talked about this. Among their demands, and they're categorized for easy reading, in the area of housing accommodations and accessibility, all campus laundry rooms are to supply laundry detergent and softener on a consistent basis.
We need fabric softener now.
When do we want it?
Now.
How? On what basis do we want it? Consistent. This is what you're dealing with at one of these elite, small liberal arts colleges that cost $60,000 a year to send your kid. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the professor in question, Sam Abrams. Sam, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So you penned a piece in response to the firestorm at which the center of which you are at, and suggested that when the student mob came for your job, there was not a lot of allies to find on the campus of Sarah Lawerence.
Absolutely, and I think that's actually more disturbing than the actual demands of having me stripped for tenure and go before a review of students, actually, because at the end of the day, the universities are where we're supposed to have dialogue, debate, discourse. We're supposed to talk about ideas. And when it turns out that more faculty sign on to a list of student demands, 40 of them, in fact, that demand that I lose my tenure versus the 27 who said I have the right to write anything, and then the hundreds who said nothing, that's very, very scary.
Well, what did they say? Why do they want you to lose your tenure? Just explain it to us.
Largely because I wrote a piece in the New York Times where I pointed out that if we want to really understand what's going on our university and college campuses, why have they become so crazy, you look to the faculty, and the faculty contribute a little bit. But for the most part, it's actually these college administrators, these folks who run the diversity offices, the folks who run the student life offices, the folks who run the student success offices. If you look at where the protests are occurring, where the friction is happening, some of it's in the classroom, but the overwhelming majority of it are, in dining halls and in residence halls. If you look over the last couple of years, you see these are disputes that take place outside the classroom. So we want to really understand who's in charge there, who's setting the tone, who's setting the sort of discourse. And you discover it's these administrators. And then when you look more deeply at who they are, you realize they're uniformly progressive, and they're pushing a very particular liberal and, again, progressive agenda.
And so the response from students and even some administrators, faculty, was to confirm what you wrote in the New York Times by suggesting you be punished and banished in response to detailing the ideological distribution of administrators.
Exactly right. And in fact, when the piece came out 6 months ago, I thought it had died down. The first flare-up, I received my first set of threats and a threat against my little boy and vandalism and all that lovely stuff within about 3 hours of the piece's publication. So very, very quick, very, very hostile. Very anti-intellectual, very much against everything that a lot of these folks believe in, which is about hearing the other side, compassion, discourse, understanding where people are coming from. Not so much.
So they don't. They say they believe in those things, but it turns out they don't when tested.
Exactly right.
And what did they threaten against your son? What threats were made against him?
stuff that would not be appropriate to say on the radio.
That's nice.
I'm so
not
sorry you had
great.
to go
I
through
had
that.
a newborn. I had a photo of him in a Sarah Lawrence T-shirt. I proudly put it on my office door at Sarah Lawrence. Office doors are covered with flair. That went missing along with a lot of other stuff. And just consider the fact that if I had done that, if I had taken down material from another professor's door that I found objectionable or I didn't agree with politically, imagine the reaction I would have had. I would have had an investigation. The police would have been called, and so on. Sadly, at Sarah Lawrence, no one called me about this. I had to reach out to them. No real investigation, as far as I can tell, actually happened. I've asked for what they've done. They really won't tell me, and they're just trying to sweep it under the rug.
So
I'm political. It's a picture of your son.
I want to understand the argument that they're making. Is the argument that they're making that your research is incorrect, or they don't like it being brought out into the light of day?
I think the latter. I actually would very much welcome, and I really would welcome a dialogue about am I right or am I wrong. In the 6 months since I've published this piece, no one has actually come up and tried to correct it. No one has said, let me do my own work, let me interview some people. No one has done a content analysis where they do what I already did, which is look at what the programming is and how out of balance or in balance is it. The whole point of higher ed and academia is to challenge these things. No one has done that. I'm not surprised no one has done that. I think it's actually pretty airtight, the work. So, no, I think they just regret and resent the fact that I'm saying it. And I'm saying it because universities are heading in a very bad direction. We need to have more balance, more ideological balance, and we need to be able to talk and have discourse and dialogue. And we're not doing it. Incidentally, since it's Chicago, one of the bright spots is actually the University of Chicago. President Zimmer down south has been leading the charge on that, along with Professor Stone, about how to deal with free speech and how to have real discourse. And Chicago is one of the bright spots, actually, in the universe of higher ed right now.
And you've had some other colleagues rally to your defense on this case, Jonathan Haidt and others who have spoken out against similar incidents that have happened to other academics around the country, Brett Weinstein at Evergreen State and such. But I just wonder, a question I always ask when we talk to people who've been subjected to the Marxist mobs is, do you think that there is really movement to change the campus culture that's now extended certainly beyond the campus, or do you just sort of have one-off voices in the wilderness at a few colleges around the country, and the Marxists are still on the march?
That's a fantastic question. I hope this is not a one-off thing. I've been concerned about free speech and expression for years, as have a lot of folks. The Heterodox Academy, that's the thing that you mentioned with John Haidt, there are over 3,000 of us who are working on this. My sense is that we're close to a tipping point. It may not be me. It may be the next case or two. But enough people are paying attention to this. And I would say evidence for that is that I'm receiving 200 to 300 emails a day still from supporters around the country. Wow. I'm being contacted by boards of trustees. People are paying attention. People are knowing. You talk about the Mueller report. I think there's a lot of crazy stuff in the political world right now that is, distracting some attention from, what's going on in higher ed right now. But I have a hunch and a sense that things are beginning to shift. It may not happen with my case. I think it will happen soon. I think there's a large silent majority out there of students who are fed up with this. Students want to have the ability to ask questions. They want to be able to push. They want to be able to study. They don't want to walk on eggshells in their dormitories all the time. They may not want to talk about identity politics 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They may just want to learn, and they may want the freedom to do that. And, my sense from what I'm hearing from students around the country is, okay, we value people. Sure, who doesn't? But at the same time, we may be going too far. I'm hopeful.
It's interesting you point to hopefulness with respect to students, not that they're young adults, but not the academics, not the administrators, that it's going to be students that are going to change the culture on campus, not the adults who've ceded control of the campus to the students.
Sadly, I feel that that's the case. The faculty and administrators have dug in harder and harder on this. And there are, again, a few bright spots of faculty and administrators around the country, but, their jobs are at stake, their futures are at stake. A lot of what they write about is at stake. And it's hard to just say, you know what, I'm going to move on or shift. So I think that you're actually going to see students do this. Students have been the catalyst for this sort of change for years. We've seen it in the 60s. We saw it again in the 80s during the Reagan Revolution. There's no reason we couldn't see it again now, and I'm hopeful. Again, one thing that a lot of students are concerned about, and I wrote about this last week in Minding the Campus, was that they are afraid of what happens when the mob comes for them. But again, the mob may not be there all the time, and enough students may begin to get fed up and say, enough is enough. And again, I'm hopeful.
Now, how did the students, what's your relationship like them in class? Do they still have a list of demands, or
are you providing detergent?
Yeah, what about that fabric softener?
So unfortunately, it's not great. In my prior years, I had won teaching awards. I had wonderful relationships with students. I think a lot of those have soured. I guess taking students to see Hamilton or To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway is considered propaganda and not a good thing to do. But I'm going to keep working because what they want more than anything is for me to just disappear, and I can't let that happen.
Good for you.
There's a piece in Quillette.com by Stephen Blackwood, who's a theologian and founding president of Ralston College, and it's about Jordan Peterson having his request for a visiting fellowship at Cambridge rescinded. It was offered, then it was rescinded, right? Peterson, who has been a professor at Harvard as well as the University of Toronto before he rose to sort of international stardom. And it's just this sentence that Mr. Blackwood writes, I wanted to get your reaction to decrying what Cambridge has done and why they've done it. He says here, with what's going on in higher ed, what is at stake are the conditions of human flourishing itself. There can be no peace, no freedom, no protection of the weak and vulnerable, no pursuit of happiness, no discovery, no science or art. In short, there can be no higher human culture at all without access to the realm of higher things, of truth, beauty, goodness, in which we all by nature can come to dwell. What indeed would be more restorative for our culture in this volatile historical moment than finding ways to reimagine ourselves together on a journey in the wilderness, but seeking the promised land.
He's completely right, and that was beautifully written, far more eloquent than I could put it. Yes, and not allowing individuals like Peterson to do their jobs and to try to stop me from doing my job, not very good for higher ed, not good for the, I don't want to say it's good for humanity necessarily, my work, but, thinking, questioning, and being able to push boundaries is why a lot of us enter academia. Remember, it's not for income. I mean, we're not paid very well. We love the idea of thinking about ideas, and that really is what drives us. Questioning, challenging, and that's why we do it. So, professors fought for years to promote academic freedom and to have tenure, and that gives you those protections. What's very, very disappointing is how many people, at least at Sarah Lawrence, decided that actually tenure protections and free speech are not that important to them. Historically, Sarah Lawrence has been a bastion for free speech. It stood up against a lot of folks during the McCarthy era. I was hoping they would do that again. They could have taken the lead on this. Sadly, they chose not to.
I wonder, we've had 8 years of Rahm Emanuel prattling on about Chicago values. I'd love to get his response to this, whether what's happening at his alma mater is consistent with whatever he thinks Chicago values and his values are. But you sound too young.
I would love to hear that.
I'm sure you would.
Love to hear that.
You sound too young to have had him as a student, though.
No, I'm way too young. He actually graduated, I think, while I was in high school still. But he came back to Sarah Lawrence at some point.
Yes.
Is his picture still up in the main office?
No, hasn't been there for quite a while.
They haven't, no statue on campus of him yet?
No, but, I hear he has some means, so if you'd like to make a donation to the school, I would certainly appreciate that. And if he hears this, I think the school could use it. So that would be very helpful.
All right, we'll pass the word. Sam Abrams, professor of politics at Sarah Lawrence College, visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us. Good luck on campus.
Thank you so much for your interest.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.